Hello and welcome to Tales by Lamplight, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Pull your chair nearer the fire, for the wind is howling like a wounded thing tonight, and the snow beats against the panes of 221B Baker Street as though it would bury us all. Chapter 1. The Knock in the Night. It was the 17th of January, 1895, and London lay beneath a pall of snow such as I had not seen since the winter of '81. The streets were muffled, the river a gray ribbon between walls of ice, and every cab horse slipped upon the cobbles. The very air seemed to have thickened, as though the city itself were holding its breath. I, John H. Watson, M.D., late of the Indian Army, sat in our familiar digs at 221B, turning the pages of the Lancet without reading them. The fire crackled in the grate, throwing restless shadows across the Persian rugs and the clutter of Holmes's chemical apparatus. My friend, Sherlock Holmes, lounged opposite me in his mouse-colored dressing gown, his lean frame stretched along the sofa like a greyhound at rest. His violin lay across his knees, and he drew from it a slow, mournful note that seemed to vibrate in the marrow of my bones. Outside, the storm had begun in earnest. The snow, which had fallen gently at dusk, now drove in horizontal sheets against the bow window, hissing as it struck the glass. The gas lamps along Baker Street flickered like dying stars, their halos blurred by the whirl of white. Somewhere below, a hansom cab clattered to a halt, the horse snorting steam into the frozen night. Holmes ceased playing. He cocked his head, listening. "Watson," said he, "do you hear it?" "Hear what, the wind?" "No. Beneath the wind. A rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. Someone is climbing the stairs with purpose." I strained my ears. The storm's roar filled them, yet now I caught it, a measured tread upon the 17 steps that led to our door. Not Mrs. Hudson's shuffle, nor the postman's hurried scamper. This was the footfall of a person who had come a long distance and would not be denied. The knock came then. 3 sharp raps, imperative as a summons from Scotland Yard. Holmes laid the violin aside and rose with that feline grace which always startled me. He crossed to the mantel, struck a match, and relit his pipe. The flame illuminated the hawk-like profile, the keen gray eyes that missed nothing. "Show them in, Mrs. Hudson," he called, though our landlady had not yet appeared. The door opened a moment later. Mrs. Hudson entered first, her usually placid face pinched with cold and something akin to fear. Snowflakes glittered on her shawl like diamonds. "There's a lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice hushed. "Wouldn't give her name, but she's in a rare state. Came in a cab from Hampstead, she says, and the driver near refused to bring her through the drifts." "Send her up," said Holmes. "And Watson, the whiskey, 2 glasses. Our visitor will need warming." Mrs. Hudson withdrew. I heard the murmur of voices below, then the slow ascent. The newcomer climbed as though each step cost her dear. Her boots scraped the carpet, and her breath came in audible gasps. The door opened fully, and she stood upon the threshold, a figure cloaked in frost. She was tall, perhaps 5'8", and wrapped in a black sealskin coat that reached her ankles. A veil of fine black lace concealed her face, but the rime upon it had stiffened into a mask of ice. Her gloved hands trembled. One clutched a small leather portmanteau, the other a sodden umbrella from which meltwater dripped steadily onto our rug. "Dr. Watson?" Her voice was low, cultured, yet edged with a tremor that spoke of more than cold. "They told me at Bart's that you kept rooms with Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Holmes stepped forward. "Madam, you have the advantage of us. Pray, come to the fire." She crossed the room with the stiffness of one half frozen. As she passed beneath the gaselier, the light caught the frost on her veil and turned it to a halo of splintered diamonds. She sank into the basket chair I pulled forward and for a moment simply held her hands to the blaze. The portmanteau she set carefully upon the rug as though it contained something fragile or dangerous. Holmes resumed his seat, pipe glowing. I poured whiskey, 2 fingers for her, 1 for myself, and placed the glass in her kid-gloved hand. She lifted the veil then, and I saw her face. She was perhaps 30 years of age, with the kind of beauty that lingers in the memory. High cheekbones, a mouth made for laughter, yet now compressed in pain, and eyes, large, dark, ringed with the violet of sleepless nights. A single curl of auburn hair had escaped her bonnet and clung damply to her temple. "Forgive the intrusion," she began, her voice steadier now. "I am Evelyn Glendower of Glendower House, Hampstead Heath. 3 nights ago my brother vanished from a locked room during the worst blizzard in 50 years. The servants swear they heard howling. The word hung in the air like a discordant note. Holmes leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Begin at the beginning, Miss Glendower. Every detail, however trivial." She took a sip of whiskey, coughed delicately, then began. "Glendower House has been in our family since the Restoration. My brother Reginald Glendower, the antiquarian, inherited it upon our father's death last Michaelmas. He was always eccentric. Collected curiosities, Egyptian scarabs, Tibetan prayer wheels, a mummified hand said to belong to a Borgia. But of late his studies turned darker. He spoke of gates and threshold, of entities that walked between worlds when the veil grew thin." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. He merely puffed his pipe, eyes half closed. "3 nights ago," she continued, "and the storm struck. We were cut off. Roads impassable, telegraph, wires down. Reginald shut himself in the library at 9 o'clock, saying he had an experiment that must not be disturbed. He locked the door from within. I heard the key turn. The only other exit is a window 20 feet above the ground, latched on the inside. At midnight the howling began. Not wind, though God knows the wind screamed loud enough. This was inside the house, a bestial note rising and falling as though some great hound bayed at the moon. The servants were terrified. Cook crossed herself and would not leave the kitchen. I ran to the library, pounded on the door. No answer. We forced the lock. The room was empty. The window latched, the fire dead, a circle of melted snow upon the hearthrug shaped like... She broke off, her hand flying to her throat. "Like a clawed paw," Holmes finished quietly. Her eyes widened. "How could you know?" "Pray continue." There were footprints in the snow outside the side door. My brother's boots, yet the stride was 7 feet between impressions, and the depth. No man could weigh so much. The prince led across the lawn and vanished beside the old yew tree as though he had been lifted bodily into the air. She opened the portmanteau then and drew forth a folded paper. With hands that still trembled, she spread it upon the table. It was a sketch done in charcoal and crimson ink, a cube of brass and bone, its faces sliding like the segments of a puzzle box. Beneath, in Reginald's spidery hand, Experiment 7, the binding. If the lament configuration is solved beneath the solstice moon, the gate opens for 7 heartbeats. I have prepared the circle. God forgive me. Holmes studied the drawing in silence. The fire popped. A coal fell with a hiss. Outside, the storm redoubled its fury, rattling the window panes like impatient fingers. "Miss Glendower," said Holmes at last, "you have brought us a pretty problem. Watson, your coat. We leave for Hampstead within the hour." "But the roads," I began. "Are impassable to ordinary men," he interrupted. "Fortunately, we are not ordinary, Mrs. Hudson. Hot bricks, coffee, and summon a 4-wheeler with chains on its wheels. The game, Watson, is afoot, and it wears 7-league boots." Evelyn Glendower rose, her face pale but composed. "There is one thing more," she said, and from her reticule drew a small object wrapped in silk. She unfolded the cloth to reveal a brass gear, no larger than a sixpence, its teeth stained with something dark. I found this in the melted snow. It was still warm. Holmes took it between thumb and forefinger, held it to the light. The staining was blood, dried now, but unmistakable. Curious, he murmured. The plot thickens and the temperature drops. Come, Watson. Destiny howls at our heels. Chapter 2. Footprints in the Frost. The four-wheeler lurched through drifts that rose to the axles, its chains clanking like Marley's ghost. Holmes sat opposite me, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together in that attitude of intense concentration I knew so well. Miss Glendower huddled beside me, her sealskin coat buttoned to the throat, the brass gear wrapped once more in silk and tucked into her reticule. Outside, London had vanished. The familiar streets were obliterated beneath a white wilderness. Only the occasional gas lamp, half buried, marked our passage. The horse slipped, recovered, slipped again. The driver cursed in a steady monotone. "Holmes," I ventured, "are you certain this is wise? The storm worsens." "Storms are nature's accomplices, Watson. They hide footprints, muffle screams, and drive the timid indoors. Perfect conditions for murder, or for something stranger." At length the cab halted before iron gates twisted with ivy and rime. Glendower House loomed beyond, a Gothic pile of weathered stone, its chimneys exhaling pale smoke into the whirling snow. The driver refused to wait. His horse was near foundering. We paid him double and watched the cab vanish into the white. Miss Glendower produced a key the size of a dagger. The gates groaned open. We trudged up the drive, snow crunching beneath our boots. The house seemed to watch us. Every window was blind with frost, yet I felt observed. A butler, tall, cadaverous, with the pallor of one who seldom sees daylight, admitted us. His name was Grimshaw. He took our coats with hands that trembled slightly. "Miss Evelyn," he said, voice sepulchral, "the master's room remains undisturbed as you ordered." "Show Mr. Holmes the library," she replied, "and rouse the staff. Every soul in this house will answer questions." Grimshaw inclined his head and led us through corridors paneled in dark oak. Portraits of long-dead Glendowers glared down. Bewigged gentlemen and ladies in farthingales, their eyes following us with painted suspicion. The air smelled of beeswax, damp stone, and something metallic I could not place. The library door stood ajar. A ribbon of yellow police tape, Lestrade's doing, no doubt, fluttered across the threshold. Holmes paused, produced a small lens, and examined the lock. "Scratches," he murmured. "Fresh. The forcing was done with a jemmy, not a key. Curious." He ducked beneath the tape. We followed. The room was large, high-ceilinged, lined with books that climbed to a plaster frieze of grinning gargoyles. A single window looked onto the heath. Its latch was fastened, the sill dusted with untouched snow. The fire had burned to ash, but the hearthrug bore a dark stain. Melted snow refrozen into a perfect circle the size of a dinner plate. Within the circle, 4 deep gouges radiated outward like the toes of some monstrous paw. Holmes knelt, lens to the marks. "Claws," he said softly. "But not animal. The angle is wrong, too regular, as though pressed by a mold. And observe the edges, they are sharp, almost metallic." I shivered, though the room was not cold. The howling the servants heard. Could it have been wind through the chimney? Wind does not leave claw marks, Watson. He rose and crossed to the window. The snow outside lay in drifts 6 feet deep. No ledge, no balcony, no means of descent. Yet upon the inner sill lay a single object. A brass cog, identical to the one Miss Glendower had shown us, but larger, 1/2 an inch across, its teeth crusted with frozen blood. Holmes wrapped it in his handkerchief. "2 gears in one night. The machine grows." Miss Glendower's face was ashen. My brother's footprints are outside. Come. We descended a servant's stair to a side door. Grimshaw produced a lantern. The snow here was less disturbed, preserved beneath the overhang of the eaves. Holmes knelt again, brushing powder-fine snow from the surface. The prints began at the threshold. A man's boot, hobnailed, size 10. The stride was extraordinary, 7 feet from heel to toe, the depth of each impression suggesting a weight of 20 stone or more. They marched in a straight line across the lawn, each print deeper than the last, until they reached the ancient yew whose branches swept the ground like a mourner's veil. There they ceased. The snow beyond was virgin, unmarked save for the delicate tracery of a robin's feet. Holmes lay full length, lens to the final print. No scuff, no slide. The walker did not turn, did not hesitate. He simply vanished. He rose, brushed snow from his coat, and peered upward. The yew's branches were laden with ice. One had snapped beneath the weight, revealing a hollow in the trunk. Holmes reached within and drew forth a length of twine, knotted at intervals. A marker, he said. Someone measured this path in advance. But why? Miss Glendower clutched her reticule. Reginald's laboratory adjoins the ice house. He kept things there. Specimens. Holmes' eyes glittered. Then let us examine the specimens. The ice house lay 50 yards distant, a brick dome half buried in the drift. Its padlock was new, the hasp scarred as though recently forced. Holmes produced his picklocks. The mechanism yielded with a click. The door swung inward on hinges stiff with frost. A blast of cold struck us, though the storm's bite was nothing to this. The interior was a cavern of sawdust and shadow. Great blocks of ice, harvested from the pond last winter, glinted like pale jade. Upon a crate in the center lay a ledger bound in black leather. Holmes opened it beneath the lantern's beam. The pages were filled with Reginald Glendower's cramped script, equations, sigils, Latin phrases. The final entry dated 3 nights prior. Experiment 7. The binding. If the lament configuration is solved beneath the solstice moon, the gate opens for 7 heartbeats. I have prepared the circle. God forgive me. Beneath the charcoal sketch we had seen in Baker Street, the brass and bone cube. Holmes closed the ledger. Your brother, Miss Glendower, was not content with antiquities. He sought to summon them. A low moan escaped her. Then the howling may have been your brother, said Holmes grimly, or something that answered in his stead. He stepped deeper into the ice house. The lantern's light caught upon something half buried in sawdust, a boot print, identical to those outside but reversed, the heel deeper than the toe. It led toward a stack of ice blocks and stopped. Holmes brushed sawdust aside. Beneath lay a circle of melted ice, refrozen into a perfect ring. At its center, a single brass screw, its thread clogged with frozen blood. Watson, he said quietly, your revolver. We are not alone in this house. The lantern flickered. For a moment, the shadows seemed to coalesce into a tall, faceted shape. Then the light steadied, and there was nothing. Chapter 3. The Ice House Ledger. The lantern's flame wavered as Holmes lifted the black ledger from the crate. Ice crystals had formed on the leather cover, yet the pages within were dry. Too dry, as though the book had been warmed by something other than the air. He turned the leaves with the delicacy of a surgeon, his gray eyes devouring every line. I stood guard at the door, revolver in hand, the cold seeping through my ulster. Miss Glendower hovered behind Holmes, her breath pluming white. The ice house smelled of sawdust and iron. Beneath it, a faint, sweet odor like overripe fruit left in the sun. Reginald's hand, she whispered. I would know it anywhere. The slant of the T, the flourish on the Y. But these symbols... Holmes traced a sigil with a gloved finger. Enochian, or a close cousin. The language Dee and Kelly claimed was dictated by angels. Your brother was courting entities far older than angels. He paused at a page headed Experiment 4, the Threshold. Beneath a diagram, a circle quartered by a cross, each arm labeled with a planetary glyph. At the center, the brass and bone cube, its faces annotated with sliding panels. A marginal note read 7 heartbeats, no more. The gate closes with the 8th. Heartbeats, I muttered. Whose? Holmes did not answer. He turned to the final entry, Experiment 7, and read aloud. The solstice moon wanes. The blizzard is the veil. I have bled the circle in my own vein. If the configuration is solved at the 3rd stroke of midnight, the gate opens. I have prepared the binding, salt, silver, and the name that must not be spoken. God forgive me, for I will not forgive myself. A charcoal sketch followed, the cube again, but now its panels were shifted, revealing a hollow interior. Within the hollow, a human eye, drawn with photographic precision, stared out. Miss Glendower recoiled. He would never... Men do strange things when they believe they stand upon the brink of revelation, said Holmes. But observe the ink. He held the page to the lantern. The words were fresh, the charcoal smudged as though recently handled. Yet the entry was dated 3 nights ago. Someone has been here since your brother vanished, he concluded. Someone who continues his work. He closed the ledger and slipped it beneath his coat. Then, with the lantern raised, he moved deeper into the ice house. The blocks of ice towered like monoliths, their surfaces scarred where saws had bitten. Between 2 blocks, a narrow passage led to a wooden door, new pine, unpainted, secured by a hasp and padlock. The padlock was open, the hasp hanging loose. Holmes pushed the door. It swung inward without a sound. Beyond lay a chamber no larger than a pantry, but fitted out as a laboratory. A deal table bore a spirit lamp, still warm. Beside it, a rack of test tubes, some containing dark fluids that caught the light like garnets. A microscope, German, expensive, stood beneath a dust cover. Upon the wall, a chart of the lunar phases, the current night circled in red. Holmes lifted the dust cover. The microscope's stage held a glass slide. He adjusted the focus and beckoned me. I looked. Upon the slide, a single drop of blood had been smeared thin. Within it floated crystalline structures, hexagonal, perfect, unlike any cell I had seen in medical school. Frozen blood, I said. But the crystals are not ice, Holmes finished. They are symmetrical, yet organic, a lattice formed under unnatural cold. Your province, doctor. He moved to the spirit lamp. Beneath it, a crucible contained a residue of ash and something metallic, brass filings fused into a lump. Miss Glendower's voice came from the doorway, small and frightened. Reginald kept a journal here, a smaller one. He called it his confessional. Holmes's head snapped up. Where? She pointed to a shelf above the microscope. A tin box painted black lay half hidden behind a stack of the Occult Review. Holmes opened it. Inside, a notebook bound in red morocco. The first page bore a single line in Reginald's hand. If I do not return, burn this. Do not read, do not seek. Holmes read it aloud, then turned the page. The entries were frantic, the handwriting deteriorating. Day 12. The cube speaks when the moon is full. It whispers my name in a voice like grinding gears. Day 14. I have cut the circle in the library floor. The boards bleed when the knife passes. The blood is not mine. Day 16. It wears my face in the mirror now. When I blink, it does not. The final entry dated the night of the disappearance. Tonight. The blizzard is the gate. I will open it and step through. If I fail, the binding will hold for 7 heartbeats. Tell Evelyn I loved her. Tell her to flee the house before the 8th. Holmes closed the notebook. Your brother believed he could control what he summoned. He was wrong. A sudden clatter made us start. The spirit lamp had toppled, though nothing had touched it. The flame guttered, then flared blue. The temperature in the chamber plummeted. My breath froze mid-air. From the ice house proper came a sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The same 7-foot stride we had seen outside. Holmes snatched the lantern and stepped into the passage. The footsteps ceased. The ice blocks gleamed. Between two of them, a fresh print had appeared, reversed as before, the heel deeper than the toe. It pointed toward the laboratory door. Holmes knelt, touched the print. The snow within was warm, steaming faintly. Impossible, I whispered. No, said Holmes, merely ingenious. Watson, the revolver, aim for the joints. He rose and moved along the passage, lantern raised. The light caught upon something half buried in sawdust. A brass rod, jointed, ending in a claw-like hand. It twitched once, then was still. Miss Glendower screamed. From the shadows at the far end of the ice house, a figure emerged, tall, 7 feet at least, cloaked in frost. Its face was a mask of brass plates sliding and clicking. Where eyes should be, faceted lenses glinted. It raised one arm, the jointed rod extended from its sleeve like a telescope. Holmes hurled the lantern. It struck the figure's chest and burst, oil flaming across the ice. The thing staggered, brass joints hissing as they met the heat. For a moment the mask slipped, revealing beneath not flesh, but a void, black and depthless. Then the ice blocks behind it shifted. A cascade of sawdust and frozen blocks buried the figure. When the dust settled, only the brass rod remained, bent and smoking. Holmes retrieved it. Part of the automaton, he said, but not the whole. The puppet master is near. He turned to Miss Glendower. Your brother's confessional mentions a binding. Where is the circle cut into the floor? Her eyes were wide with terror. The library, beneath the rug. Then we return there, and we bring the ledger, the notebook, and the revolver. The 8th heartbeat approaches. Chapter 4. A Widow's Silence. We emerged from the ice house into a world made monochrome. The snow had ceased, but the sky hung low and leaden, pressing upon the heath like a coffin lid. Glendower House loomed ahead, its windows now glowing with lamplight. Every servant, it seemed, had been roused. Holmes strode ahead, the brass rod tucked beneath his coat, the red morocco notebook in his pocket. Miss Glendower hurried to keep pace, her boots leaving delicate prints beside his longer strides. I brought up the rear, revolver cocked, the cold metal a comfort against my palm. Grimshaw met us at the side door. His cadaverous face was slick with sweat despite the frost. Miss Evelyn, he said, the staff are gathered in the kitchen as you bade, but Mrs. Gripe, she is not among them. The housekeeper? Holmes asked sharply. The same. She was seen an hour ago carrying a tray to the west wing. Since then, nothing. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The west wing, where the family portraits hang. And the old nursery, Miss Glendower added, her voice small. Reginald converted it to a workroom after father died. Show us. We traversed corridors now alive with whispers. Maids peered from doorways, eyes wide. A footman clutched a poker as though it were Excalibur. The air smelled of tallow and fear. The west wing was darker, colder. The gas jets here had been turned low, their flames guttering in drafts that sighed through the wainscot. Portraits lined the walls, Glendowers in armor and periwigs in mourning. One, a woman in black bombazine, seemed to follow us with painted eyes. At the end of the passage, a baize door. Holmes pushed it open. The nursery had been gutted. Gone were the rocking horse and the doll's house. In their place stood workbenches littered with tools, files, pliers, a brazier still warm. Upon a trestle table lay the brass and bone cube half assembled, its panels gleaming. Beside it, a woman's glove, black kid stained with oil. Holmes lifted the glove. "Mrs. Gripes?" Miss Glendower nodded. She always wore black after her husband died. Said it was proper. "Proper," Holmes echoed. "Yet she works with her hands bare now." Curious. He moved to the brazier. Within ashes and a lump of melted brass. He poked it with the rod. It rang like a bell. "Someone destroyed evidence here recently." A faint sound reached us, scratching as of a rat behind the skirting. Holmes knelt, pressed his ear to the floor. The scratching ceased. "Beneath us," he said. "The old servants' passage. Watson, your shoulder." Together we shifted a heavy oak wardrobe. Behind it, a panel slid aside to reveal a narrow stair descending into darkness. The air that rose was warm, humid, smelling of blood and hot metal. Holmes led with the lantern. The stair was steep, the treads worn smooth by generations of furtive feet. At the bottom, a brick tunnel, its walls damp with condensation. It ran beneath the west wing toward the kitchens. Halfway along, a door, new pine again like the laboratory. It stood ajar. Holmes pushed it wide. The room beyond was the still room once used for distilling herbs. Now it was a slaughterhouse. A deal table dominated the center, its surface dark with blood, fresh, still wet. Upon it lay a woman's apron soaked through. A cleaver rested beside a pie dish. The crust was broken, revealing a filling of minced meat and something that gleamed. Brass filings. Miss Glendower gagged. I steadied her. Holmes examined the blood with his lens. Human. Type AB, rare, and trace elements of atropine and scopolamine. The devil's breath. Someone was rendered suggestible, then bled. He lifted the cleaver. The blade was nicked, as though it had struck bone. Beneath the table, a single brass button, engraved with the Glendower crest. "Mrs. Gripes," Miss Glendower whispered. "She sewed them herself." Holmes pocketed the button. "The widow is no widow. She is the architect." A crash from the kitchen above. We ran. The kitchen was chaos. Servants milled like frightened sheep. Cook, a mountain of a woman, stood over a shattered pie, her face crimson. "It were Mrs. Gripe," she bellowed. "Came in bold as brass, took the blood pudding from the larder, said it were for the master's experiment. Then she locked herself in the pantry." Holmes strode to the pantry door. It was locked, the key still in the hole. He turned it. Mrs. Gripe sat at a small table, polishing silver with mechanical fury. Her black dress was pristine, her gray hair coiled tight. A single candle burned before her. "Mrs. Gripe," Holmes said, "where is Reginald Glendower?" She did not look up. "The master is indisposed." Indisposed in a locked room, or in the ice house, drugged and bleeding? Her cloth paused. "You know nothing, Mr. Holmes. I know the blood in the still room is yours. Type AB willingly given. I know the automaton in the ice house was built from attic armor and clockwork. I know the howling was a phonograph cylinder hidden in the U." For the first time she met his eyes. Hers were pale blue, cold as the snow outside. "Clever man. But you are too late. The 8th heartbeat approaches." She rose, in her hand a small brass key. She inserted it into a knot in the table's wood. A panel slid aside, revealing a cavity. Within lay a revolver, Webley, fully loaded. Holmes moved like lightning. The brass rod whipped from his coat, striking her wrist. The revolver clattered to the flagstones. I kicked it away. Mrs. Gripe smiled, a thin, terrible smile. "You think me the villain? I am the guardian. Reginald opened the gate. I merely delayed the guest." She reached for the candle. Holmes seized her arm. "Delayed with blood and pie crust?" "With love," she said. "He promised me eternity. I gave him my vein. When he faltered, I took his place." Miss Glendower stepped forward. You drugged my brother. You built that thing in the ice house. I built a vessel, Mrs. Gripe corrected. The entity needed a form, brass and bone, blood and will. But the binding holds, for now. Holmes bound her wrists with his handkerchief. The circle in the library, you will show us how to break it. Mrs. Gripe laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Break it, fool. The circle is the lock. The key is in the pie. She nodded to the shattered dish on the floor. Within the minced meat something glinted, a brass gear warm to the touch. Holmes lifted it. The heart of the machine, Watson the revolver. We return to the library. The widow comes with us. As we dragged her upward, the house seemed to groan. The gas jets flickered. Somewhere a clock began to strike, slow, deliberate, 1, 2, 3. The third stroke of midnight. Chapter 5. The Crimson Vial. The library door slammed behind us as though the house itself wished to keep its secrets. Mrs. Gripe stood between Holmes and me, wrists bound, her black bombazine dress rustling like dry leaves. The brass gear, warm, pulsing faintly, lay in Holmes' palm. Miss Glendower's face was bloodless. She clutched the red Morocco notebook as though it were a hymnal. Holmes strode to the hearthrug. With a swift motion he rolled it back, revealing the circle cut into the oak floorboards. A perfect ring, 3 feet across, the grooves blackened with old blood. At the 4 cardinal points, silver coins had been hammered flush, Roman denarii, their faces worn smooth. Mrs. Gripe's lips curled. The binding, salt, silver, and the name. Reginald was always sentimental. Holmes knelt, lens to the groove. The blood is dry, yet the silver is warm. The circle holds, but barely. He placed the brass gear at the center. It spun once, then settled, teeth aligning with invisible grooves. A low hum filled the room, like distant bees or gears meshing in a clock too vast to see. Miss Glendower gasped. The cube! Where is it? Safe, Holmes said. In my pocket. We shall not solve it until we understand the cost. He rose and crossed to his portable laboratory, laid out on the library table. Spirit lamp, test tubes, a small centrifuge. From the still room he had taken a sample of the bloodied pie crust. Now he scraped it into a beaker. The crimson separated into serum and dark clots. Human blood, type AB, he announced, and trace elements of atropine, scopolamine, and something else, belladonna in lethal concentration. Mrs. Gripe, you intended more than suggestion. You meant murder. The housekeeper's eyes glittered. Reginald begged for release. I gave him the draft in his brandy. He slept like a child while I built the vessel. Miss Glendower rounded on her. You drugged my brother? I preserved him, Mrs. Gripe corrected. The entity needed a host. Brass and bone are brittle without flesh to anchor them. I bled myself to paint the circle, to lure it. When it came, I would offer Reginald, willing or not. Holmes decanted the serum into a vial. And the automaton in the ice house? A decoy, clockwork and armor animated by a phonograph cylinder. The howling convinced the servants the house was haunted. They stayed below stairs while I worked above. I stared at the circle. Then Reginald is alive, Holmes said. Drugged, hidden, bleeding slowly to keep the binding warm. The reversed footprints were made by dragging a sled, his body unconscious, to the ice house. The depth came from the weight of ice blocks piled atop the sled to mask the trail. Mrs. Gripe laughed softly. Clever? But you miss the poetry. The entity wears him now. When the 8th heartbeat comes, the gate opens fully. Brass will walk in flesh. The hum grew louder. The silver coins began to sweat, beads of mercury-like liquid forming, running into the grooves. The brass gear spun faster, teeth clicking, like a beetle's wings. Holmes snatched it up. Watson, the revolver. Cover the door. Miss Glendower, the notebook. Read the final page aloud. She opened it with trembling fingers. If the binding fails, break the circle with fire and the true name. The vial is in the pie. Do not hesitate. 7 heartbeats. 8 and all is lost. The vial, Holmes echoed. Mrs. Gripe, where is it? The housekeeper's smile was terrible. In the pie you so cleverly dissected, but you are too late. Holmes whirled to the table. The pie dish lay shattered, the minced meat scattered. He plunged his hand into the mess, fingers closing on a small glass tube stoppered with wax. He held it to the light, crimson liquid thick as syrup. Belladonna and scopolamine, he said. The counter-agent. Enough to wake a dozen men or kill one. A scream tore through the house, not human but mechanical, rising to a shriek. The library door rattled in its frame. Holmes uncorked the vial. Mrs. Gripe, the true name. Speak it, or I shatter the circle and let the entity take you instead. Her composure cracked. You would not. Try me. The door burst open. Grimshaw stumbled in, face slashed, blood streaming. The ice house, it's moving, the blocks, they're falling. Holmes seized Mrs. Gripe by the collar. The name! She spat it, a word in no human tongue, guttural, grinding. The hum ceased. The brass gear fell still. Holmes thrust the vial into my hand. Watson, the ice house, find Reginald, I will hold the circle. I ran. The corridors blurred. Servants cowered in doorways. The side door hung off its hinges, snow poured in like sand. The ice house dome loomed, cracks spider-webbing the brick. Inside, chaos. Ice blocks had toppled, forming a crude throne. Upon it sat a figure, Reginald Glendower, or what had been. His eyes were open, pupils dilated to pinpricks. Brass filaments threaded his veins, pulsing beneath the skin. His mouth moved, but the voice was not his. 7 heartbeats. I forced the vial between his lips. The crimson liquid poured down his throat. He convulsed, brass filaments retracting like burned wires. Behind me, a crash. The automaton, half melted, one lens cracked, lurched from the shadows. Its claw hand reached for me. I fired. The bullet struck the brass chest. Sparks flew. The thing staggered, then collapsed, gears spilling across the sawdust. Reginald slumped forward. I caught him. His pulse was faint but human. From the house, a single gunshot, then silence. I dragged Reginald into the snow. The storm had broken. Stars pricked the sky like ice needles. Holmes emerged from the side door, coat torn, face streaked with soot. Behind him, Miss Glendower supported Mrs. Gripe, now bound with curtain cord, her black dress singed. The circle is broken, Holmes said. The entity fled back through the gate. Mrs. Gripe's revolver misfired, Providence, perhaps. She will hang for attempted murder. Reginald stirred in my arms. Evelyn? She knelt, weeping. I'm here. Holmes lit his pipe with a splinter from the ruined door. The crimson vial saved him, but the cost was high. The house is tainted. The ice house must be raised. And the cube? He drew it from his pocket. The brass and bone puzzle box was cracked, one panel hanging loose, within a single drop of blood still warm. Evidence, he said, for Scotland Yard, and a warning. Some doors, once opened, can never fully close. Chapter 6. The Séance at Midnight. The library had become a tribunal. A ring of chairs faced the broken circle. The silver denarii lay scattered like spent bullets. Reginald Glendower, pale, bandaged but alive, sat propped in an armchair, a blanket about his shoulders. Mrs. Gripe, wrists in irons, occupied a straight-backed chair beneath Grimshaw's watchful eye. Lestrade had arrived with 2 constables. Their boots left melting snow upon the parquet. Holmes stood at the mantel, the cracked cube in one hand, the crimson vial, now empty, in the other. We have the mechanism, he said, but not the motive. Mrs. Gripe claims love, yet love does not forge automatons nor bleed a man for 7 nights. We require the truth, and the dead are often more forthcoming than the living. Miss Glendower's eyes widened. A séance? After all this? Not a séance, Holmes corrected, a reconstruction. The entity spoke through mirrors and phonographs. Let us give it a stage. He placed the cube at the circle's center. The brass gear, the warm one from the pie, fit into a hollow with a soft click. The panels began to slide of their own accord, though no hand touched them. Lestrade bristled. Holmes, this is blasphemy. This is evidence, Holmes replied. Watson, the lights. I dimmed the gas jets until only 5 candles remained. North, south, east, west, and one upon the mantel. Their flames burned straight, unnaturally still. Holmes addressed the room. Reginald, repeat the words you spoke the night you opened the gate. Mrs. Gripe, the name you uttered in the kitchen. Together. Reginald's voice was a croak. I cannot. You must. The binding is broken, but the echo remains. Speak, or the echo speaks for you. Mrs. Gripe's irons clinked as she leaned forward. Azrael Aketh Vorath Keth Esh. Reginald joined, faltering. Eshmord Thal. The candles flared blue. The temperature plummeted. Frost spidered across the windows. The cube's panels locked into their final configuration. A low hum filled the room, rising to a grinding whine. The mirror above the mantel, cracked from the earlier struggle, rippled like water. Within its depths a figure formed, tall, faceted brass joints glinting. It raised a hand. The reflection did not mirror the gesture. You summon me again, it said, voice layered. Reginald's, Mrs. Gripe's, and something ancient beneath. The gate is narrow, but memory is wide. Holmes stepped forward. You are not Azrael. You are a reflection, a recording. Speak your purpose. The figure tilted its head. Purpose is flesh. I was promised a host. The circle held me 7 heartbeats. The 8th was denied. Mrs. Gripe laughed, a cracked sound. I offered myself, my blood, my will. Flesh without authority, the reflection sneered. The antiquarian bargained. He solved the configuration beneath the solstice moon. He spoke the name. The gate opened. I stepped halfway. Reginald shuddered. I thought I could bind it, control it. Eternal life. Eternal servitude, the entity corrected. I wore your skin for 7 nights. Your veins carried my gears, your heart beat my rhythm. Then the widow intervened. Holmes's eyes gleamed. With the phonograph and the automaton, a diversion. A delay, it said. She built a vessel of brass and bone, fed it her blood. But the vessel was flawed. The circle cracked. I retreated. Yet I left a seed. The mirror's surface bulged. A brass filament, thin as wire, extended, questing toward Reginald. He screamed as it touched his bandaged arm. The wound reopened, blood welling black. I fired. The bullet passed through the filament, shattering the mirror. Glass exploded outward, suspended in air like a storm of diamonds. Holmes snatched the cube. With 3 precise twists, he reversed the panels. The filament retracted, sizzling. The suspended shards fell, tinkling to the rug. The candles guttered. The hum ceased. Reginald slumped, unconscious. Mrs. Gripe stared at the empty frame, her face a mask of ruin. Lestrade cleared his throat. Well, Mr. Holmes? Holmes wrapped the cube in silk. The entity was never fully here, a projection amplified by the cube's geometry and the circle's resonance. Mrs. Gripe's blood acted as a conductor, Reginald's as the key. The seed was suggestion. Scopolamine in the brandy mirrored illusions, the phonograph's howl. The automaton was the final touch, a puppet to convince the household a demon walked. He turned to Mrs. Gripe. You loved him, yes, but love twisted into possession. You sought to bind him to you forever, through the entity or through guilt. When he resisted, you staged his disappearance, planning to rescue him and claim his gratitude. Mrs. Gripe's head bowed. He promised me eternity. I believed him. Holmes's voice softened, but only slightly. Eternity is not ours to give. Watson, the vial's residue, tested against Reginald's blood. We will find the drugs, the mirrors, the wires, the rest is theater. He lifted a shard of mirror. Behind it, in the chimney, a lantern and angled glass, the classic Pepper's ghost. A wire ran to the phonograph in the yew tree, its cylinder still warm. Lestrade snapped handcuffs on Mrs. Gripe. Attempted murder, fraud, assault on a constable. Enough to hang you, twice. As they led her away, she whispered, "The 8th heartbeat. It waits." Reginald stirred. "Evelyn, forgive me." His sister knelt, tears freezing on her cheeks. "It's over." Holmes lit his pipe. "Not quite. The cube must be destroyed, the circle filled with concrete, and the house." He looked around the library at the frost still crawling across the ceiling like veins. "Should be sold. Some stains no bleach can remove." Chapter 7. The hound that wasn't Dawn crept over Hampstead Heath like a guilty thing, pale, reluctant, and far too cold. The blizzard had spent itself in the night, leaving a landscape scoured clean and glittering. Glendower House stood silent, windows blind with frost, the broken icehouse dome gaping like a cracked skull. Holmes and I walked the grounds alone. Lestrade had taken Mrs. Gripe and the automaton's wreckage to Scotland Yard. Reginald and Evelyn slept under laudanum and a police nurse. The servants had been dismissed until the magistrates decided their fate. Only the wind remained, moaning through the yew tree as though mourning its lost cylinder. Holmes carried a measuring tape and a canvas bag. I carried coffee in a thermos and the Webley, still warm from the night. "You are quiet, Watson," he observed, kneeling beside the yew. "I am listening," I replied. "For the 8th heartbeat." He smiled faintly. "Then listen to this." He brushed snow from the trunk. The hollow where the phonograph wire had run was now stuffed with rags, new rags, smelling of kerosene. "Someone returned after we left," he said, "to destroy the last evidence." He drew out the rags. Beneath lay a wax cylinder, cracked but intact. He slipped it into the bag. We followed the original trail, the 7-foot strides across the lawn. The prints had filled with drifted snow, yet the outline remained. Impossibly deep, impossibly long. At the point where they vanished, Holmes lay flat and dug with his bare hands. 10 inches down, he struck wood. A sled, narrow, painted white to blend with snow, lay buried beneath a thin crust. Iron runners still iced. "The reversed prints," I said. Mrs. Gripe dragged the sled toward the yew, then walked backward in the same grooves to the house. Clever. Clever, but not original. I saw the trick in Prague, 89. Smugglers on the Moldau. He unearthed a second object, a bundle of iron weights, each stamped with the Glendower crest, 20 stone in total. She piled these on the sled for the outward journey, Holmes explained. Removed them here, dragged the empty sled back while walking in the same prints. The depth diminished gradually, exactly as we observed. He stood brushing snow from his coat. But the hound, that was the masterstroke. We moved to the ice house. The dome had collapsed inward, revealing a hollow beneath the floor, a pit lined with brick 6 feet deep. Within lay the remains of the unthrone, a coat stuffed with straw, a carved pumpkin frozen solid, and a speaking trumpet fashioned from tin. Holmes lifted the pumpkin. Its eye sockets were packed with phosphorus paste, still faintly luminous. "The hound that wasn't," he said. Mrs. Gripe lowered this effigy on ropes from the yew, swung it above the lawn at midnight. The phosphorus glowed, The trumpet amplified the phonograph's howl. From the upper windows it appeared to lope across the snow, a simple pendulum yet terrifying in moonlight. He pointed to scorch marks on the brick. She intended to burn it all last night. The rags and kerosene were her final act, thwarted only because Lestrade arrived sooner than expected. I stared at the grotesque head, and the servant saw this thing? Saw and believed. Terror is a contagious disease, Watson. Once the household accepted a supernatural hound, every creak became a claw, every shadow a demon. We climbed out. The sun was higher now, striking sparks from the snow. Holmes paused at the icehouse door. "One last anomaly," he said. He knelt and brushed snow from the threshold. Beneath lay a single boot print, Reginald's boot, but the nail pattern was reversed as though the sole had been carved anew. "She made a false pair," Holmes said. "Wore them on the sled to create the impossible stride, then switched to normal boots for the return. The depth was achieved with weights, the length by standing on stilts, brass rods, jointed, hidden beneath her skirts. He produced the brass rod we had recovered, the one that had twitched in the sawdust. It telescoped to 7 feet. Stilts, claw hand, mask of foil, Mrs. Gripe was the entity, all of it. I exhaled, watching my breath plume. Then there was never anything supernatural. Holmes' eyes were grave. Never is a large word. The cube is old, older than the house. The words Reginald spoke are older still. We broke the performance, not the possibility. Some doors, once opened, remain ajar. He slipped the false boot sole into his bag. "Come, breakfast awaits, and then Scotland Yard. The hound is dead, but its maker must face the gallows." We turned toward the house. As we walked, Holmes spoke softly. "Mark this, Watson. The most dangerous beast is the one that wears a human face and calls itself love." Behind us, the yew creaked in the wind. For a moment I thought I heard it again, the howl, but it was only the branches, only the wind, only the echo of a cylinder that would never play again. Chapter 8. The Blizzard's Heart. The sun had betrayed us. By noon the sky darkened once more and the blizzard returned with a vengeance, as though the heath itself resented our unraveling of its secrets. Snow lashed Glendower House in sheets, obliterating the dawn's clarity. The wind screamed, no longer content to moan, and the cold bit through my ulster like a living thing. Holmes and I stood in the library, the broken circle now swept clean of frost and silver coins. Reginald Glendower rested upstairs, tended by Evelyn and the police nurse. Lestrade had departed with Mrs. Gripe, her final words. The 8th heartbeat waits, still echoing in my mind. The brass and bone cube lay on the table, its cracked panels sealed with wax to prevent further tampering. Holmes lit his pipe, the match flare briefly warming his gaunt features. "The hound was a fiction, Watson, but the storm is real, and it hides something yet." I frowned. Mrs. Gripe confessed. The automaton, the sled, the phonograph, all accounted for. Yet the ledger's final page was freshly inked. He produced the black-bound book from his coat. Someone wrote in it after Reginald's disappearance. Mrs. Gripe was in custody. Who then? He opened to the last entry, dated 3 nights prior, and pointed to a line beneath the charcoal sketch of the cube. Experiment 8, the exchange, one soul for another. Evelyn will open the gate at the 3rd stroke of midnight. The entity wears my face now. The ink glistened as though wet. I touched it. My finger came away smudged. "Impossible," I said. "We've been here all night." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Not impossible, deliberate. The ice house holds the answer." We donned coats and scarves, the storm's roar shaking the windows as we stepped into the white. The heath was a void, landmarks vanished, the yew tree a mere shadow. The icehouse dome, half collapsed, loomed like a barrow mound. The door hung ajar, hinges screaming as Holmes forced it open. Inside, the air was warm, unnaturally so, as though the storm's cold could not penetrate. Sawdust lay in heaps where the ice blocks had fallen. The pit beneath the throne gaped empty. Holmes raised his lantern. The light caught the ledger lying open on a crate where we had left it. But the pages were different, newer, the edges unyellowed. He read aloud. Experiment 8, Addendum. The widow failed. The circle is broken, but the gate remains. Evelyn is the key, her blood, her will. At the third stroke, the configuration will align. The heath will kneel. The ink was fresh, the charcoal sketch redrawn. The cube, its panels open, a brass heart pulsing within. Evelyn, I whispered. She's upstairs with Reginald. Holmes' face hardened. Not Evelyn, a hand mimicking Reginald's. Someone else in this house plays the final act. A sound, soft, metallic, came from the pit. Holmes swung the lantern. At the bottom, half buried in sawdust, lay a brass gear, larger than the others, its teeth engraved with sigils. It spun slowly as though wound by an unseen spring. Holmes climbed down. The gear was warm, its motion hypnotic. Beneath it, a trapdoor, brick, seamless, but outlined by a faint glow. Watson, your shoulder. We pried it open. A tunnel stretched below, its walls carved with the same Enochian sigils from the ledger. The air smelled of blood and ozone. Holmes descended, lantern in one hand, the brass rod in the other. I followed, revolver ready. The tunnel sloped downward, then leveled into a circular chamber. At its center stood a second circle, larger, cut into stone, filled with molten brass that pulsed like a living thing. Above it hung a mirror, unframed, its surface rippling. Within, a figure, Reginald's face, but wrong, eyes faceted, mouth a sliding plate. You are late, detective, it said, voice grinding like gears. Holmes stepped to the circle. You are not Reginald. You are Grimshaw. The figure laughed. The butler? A pawn. He carried my tools, polished my gears. His loyalty was cheap. I started. Grimshaw. But he was wounded. A cut from his own knife, Holmes said. To divert suspicion. He forged the ledger's addendum, moved the gears, kept the gate alive while Mrs. Gripe played her part. She was the distraction. Grimshaw the architect. The mirror pulsed. The heath kneels tonight. Evelyn is ready. Her blood will finish what Reginald began. Holmes hurled the brass rod. It struck the mirror's center. The glass shattered inward, revealing a mechanism. Gears, wires, a phonograph needle still spinning. The figure vanished. From above, a scream, Evelyn's. We ran. The tunnel led to the house's cellar, then the kitchen stair. The library door was open. Evelyn stood within the broken circle, the cube in her hands, panels sliding. Her eyes were blank, pupils dilated, scopolamine again. Grimshaw loomed behind her, a syringe in one hand, a brass key in the other. His cadaverous face twisted into a smile. The gate opens, he said. Her blood is pure. Holmes lunged. Grimshaw swung the key. It grazed Holmes' temple, drawing blood. I fired, not at Grimshaw, but at the cube. The bullet cracked its frame. The panels froze. Evelyn dropped it, collapsing. Holmes tackled Grimshaw, pinning him. I tore the syringe away. It held a crimson liquid, belladonna, undiluted. Holmes bound Grimshaw with his own belt. You served the entity, not Reginald. You wrote the addendum to lure Evelyn. The mirror was your stage, Grimshaw spat. The heath will rise. You've only delayed. Holmes struck him once, silencing him. Evelyn stirred, coughing. The cube, it whispered. Holmes lifted the broken puzzle box. It will whisper no more. He smashed it against the hearthstone. Brass and bone scattered, the sigils dulling. The molten brass in the tunnel below hissed, then hardened. The storm outside faltered as though the heath exhaled. Chapter 9. The Mirror Cracks. The library clock struck the third stroke of midnight as Holmes crushed the cube beneath his heel. Brass shards scattered like golden hail across the hearthstone, each fragment dulling the instant it lost contact with the whole. The air, thick with ozone and the copper tang of blood, seemed to exhale. The storm outside faltered. Snowflakes hung suspended in the window panes, then drifted downward as though released from a spell. Grimshaw lay trussed on the rug, his cadaverous face contorted in fury. Evelyn knelt beside Reginald's armchair, pressing a damp cloth to her brother's brow. The police nurse had fled upstairs at the first gunshot. Lestrade's constables were still an hour away through the drifts. Holmes wiped blood from his temple where Grimshaw's key had struck. The performance ends, Watson. Yet every illusion leaves a residue. We must cauterize the wound. He crossed to the mantel mirror, now a spiderweb of cracks from my earlier bullet. Behind the fractured glass, the Pepper's ghost apparatus lay exposed. Angled pane, lantern, wires running into the chimney. Holmes traced one wire downward. It vanished beneath the wainscot. Grimshaw's voice, he said, amplified through the speaking trumpet in the ice house, reflected in every mirror in the house. A simple circuit, yet masterful in its reach. Grimshaw laughed, a wet, rattling sound. Simple? I studied under Maskelyne himself. The cube was the key, but the mirrors were the gate. Every reflection carried my voice, my will. The entity was me. Holmes's eyes narrowed. You confess, then, not to summoning a demon, but to impersonating one. Confess? Grimshaw strained against his bonds. I became it. Reginald's occult babble gave me the script. Mrs. Gripe's blood gave me the pigment. The scopolamine gave me their minds. I walked the heath in stilts and brass, spoke through mirrors, bled them drop by drop. When the circle cracked, I rewrote the ledger, fresh ink, fresh fear. Evelyn was to be the final vessel. Evelyn shuddered. You drugged me in the kitchen, the tea. Belladonna and suggestion, Grimshaw sneered. You solved the cube in your sleep, walked to the circle like a puppet. Another minute and your blood would have sealed the binding forever. Holmes knelt, gathering the cube's fragments into a silk handkerchief. Yet you failed. The revolver spoke, the mirror cracked, the gate closed. Your stage is dark. Grimshaw's eyes gleamed. Dark? Look to the hearth. The fire had burned low, but beneath the ashes something glowed, molten brass pooling in the shape of a perfect circle. From its center rose a single filament thin as spider silk, questing upward. Holmes snatched the poker. Watson! The vial! I hurled the empty crimson vial into the flames. Glass shattered. The residual belladonna hissed, flash-boiling the molten brass. The filament recoiled, blackening, then dissolved into smoke. Grimshaw screamed, a sound not human but metallic, as though every gear in his body ground at once. His back arched, his eyes rolled white. Reginald stirred, voice hoarse. The seed. He said he left a seed. Holmes pressed the poker to Grimshaw's chest. The seed was suggestion, nothing more. Scopolamine in the brandy, mirrors in every room, phonograph, cylinders hidden in the walls. You planted fear, and fear grew teeth. He turned to me. Search him. I rolled Grimshaw onto his side, beneath his coat a harness of brass wires and tiny gears, miniature speakers, a battery cell, a wax cylinder no larger than a thimble. The final phonograph strapped to his heart. Holmes pried it free. The cylinder bore a single groove, Grimshaw's voice distorted, repeating the Enochian name. The 8th heartbeat, Holmes said, not supernatural, mechanical, a metronome in his chest ticking through the wires to every mirror. When it reached 8, the suggestion would peak. Evelyn would cut her own throat, believing it the entity's command. He crushed the cylinder beneath his boot. The ticking stopped. Grimshaw sagged, the fight gone. You've broken the machine, he whispered. But the idea lives. Someone else will solve the cube. Someone else will speak the name. Holmes stood. Ideas die without believers, and you, sir, are the last. He opened the library door. The storm had ceased entirely. Moonlight poured through the windows, silvering the broken glass. In the silence, Big Ben tolled once, midnight. Evelyn rose, steadying herself on the table. The house. It feels empty now. Empty of lies, Holmes said. Tomorrow we fill the circles with concrete, burn the ledgers, dismantle every wire. The mirrors will be smashed, the phonographs melted. Glendower House will stand, but its voice will be silenced. Reginald's eyes met Holmes. And me? The drugs? We'll pass, I said, checking his pulse. Belladonna leaves the system in days, the bruises will fade, but the mind... Holmes lit his pipe with a spill from the dying fire. The mind heals with truth. You sought eternity, Mr. Glendower, and found a stage magician in a butler's coat. Let that be your lesson. He turned to Grimshaw. You will hang, not for summoning demons, but for attempted murder, fraud, and assault. The yard will have its confession, recorded on a fresh cylinder, in your own voice. Grimshaw closed his eyes. The Heath will remember. Holmes smiled thinly. The Heath forgets everything under snow. He gathered the brass fragments, the crushed cylinder, the harness. Watson, the constable's whistle. Lestrade approaches. Through the window, lanterns bobbed along the drive, 3, then 4. The law tardy but inevitable. Evelyn embraced her brother. It's over. Holmes looked once more at the hearth. The molten brass had cooled into a dull ring, the filament gone. Yet for an instant in the moonlight, the cracks in the mirror seemed to form a face. Reginald's or Grimshaw's, or something older. Then the image shattered as Lestrade's men burst in and the library filled with the mundane clatter of justice. Chapter 10. The Warm Cup of Truth. The fire in 221B Baker Street had never burned brighter. Dawnlight, pink and gold, crept through the bow window, gilding the clutter of chemical apparatus and Persian rugs. Outside, London lay hushed beneath a blanket of snow, the storm's fury reduced to a gentle drift. Holmes lounged in his dressing gown, pipe glowing, the brass fragments of the cube arranged on a velvet cloth like the bones of some extinct creature. I, Watson, sat opposite, turning a cup of Mrs. Hudson's cocoa between my palms. Evelyn Glendower, wrapped in one of Holmes' spare ulsters, occupied the basket chair, her face pale but composed. Reginald, bandaged and hollow-eyed, reclined on the sofa, a blanket tucked about him. Mrs. Hudson bustled in with a fresh pot. There now, nothing like cocoa to chase the ghosts away. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Ghosts, Mrs. Hudson? Merely stage machinery and a butler with delusions of grandeur. She snorted and withdrew. The door clicked shut. Holmes leaned forward, pipe stem tracing the velvet. The case, Watson, was a conjurer's trick on a grand scale. Let us lay the cards upon the table. He began with the footprints. Grimshaw, not Mrs. Gripe, was the architect. He served the Glendowers for 20 years, faithful as a shadow, until Reginald's occult studies offered a darker path. Grimshaw studied Maskelyne's illusions in secret, built the automaton from attic armor and clockwork, forged the 7-foot stilts. The sled, the weights, the reversed boots, all his. Reginald stirred. He encouraged my experiments, brought me books from the British Museum. Planted the seed, Holmes said. The cube came from a Soho curiosity shop, genuine antique but harmless. Grimshaw added the Enochian sigils, the sliding panels, the hidden phonograph. He drugged your brandy with scopolamine, suggested the gate, the entity. You solved the cube in a trance, believing you summoned Azrael. Evelyn's voice was small. And the blood? Mrs. Gripe's, Holmes replied. Type AB, rare. She discovered Grimshaw's plan, thought it love, not murder. She bled herself to paint the circle, built the pumpkin hound as a rival illusion, hoping to drive you mad and claim inheritance. Two conjurers, each unaware of the other, dancing on the same stage. I set down my cup. The mirrors? Pepper's ghost. Perfected. Wires ran through the walls to every reflective surface. Grimshaw's voice, recorded on cylinders, spoke from the glass. The entity was his reflection in brass foil, amplified by lantern and suggestion. The molten brass in the tunnel? A crucible of filings and phosphorus heated by a spirit lamp. The filament? A wire coated in glow paint, drawn upward by a hidden spring. Reginald shuddered. I felt it inside me. Scopolamine and belladonna, I said. Hallucinations, dilated pupils, the brass filaments you saw in your veins. Nothing but suggestion and bruised skin from the harness Grimshaw wore beneath his coat. Holmes tapped the largest en gear. This was the heart, a metronome ticking through the wires to every mirror. At the 8th beat, the final suggestion. Evelyn would cut her throat, believing it the entity's command. My bullet cracked the cube. The metronome stopped at 7. Evelyn's eyes filled. And Grimshaw? Hanged, Holmes said flatly. Lestrade has his confession, recorded on a fresh cylinder in Grimshaw's own voice. Mrs. Gripe will join him on the gallows for complicity. The house is sealed. The circles filled with concrete, the mirrors smashed, the phonographs melted. Glendower Heath will forget. Reginald sat up, wincing. The ledger's final page, the fresh ink. Grimshaw's last flourish, written while we slept in the library. He slipped downstairs, added the addendum, moved the gear to the pit, a final twist to lure Evelyn to the circle. Holmes rose, crossed to the window. Snow slid from the sill in soft thuds. The blizzard provided the theater. Muffled sounds hid footprints, kept the world at bay. Without it, the illusions would have crumbled at dawn. He turned, pipe smoke curling like a question mark. To the warmth of reason which no storm can extinguish. He raised his cup. We drank. The cocoa was rich, sweet, utterly human. Evelyn set hers down. What now? Sell the house, Holmes advised. Burn the ledgers. Live, Miss Glendower. Your brother sought eternity and found a butler's coat. Let that be his epitaph. Reginald's voice was steady for the first time. I will study medicine, Dr. Watson. Real gates between life and death. No more cubes. I smiled. A wise choice. Holmes returned to the table, gathered the brass fragments into a small tin. Evidence for the yard. And a reminder. The most dangerous entity is the human mind, given a mirror and a motive. He lit the fire higher. The fragments glowed, then dulled as the flames consumed their last secret. Outside, a cab clattered to a stop. Lestrade's voice drifted up, official, satisfied. The case was closed. Evelyn stood, smoothing the ulster. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. You gave us back our lives. Holmes bowed. We merely turned up the gas. The door closed behind them. The room settled into companionable silence, broken only by the fire's crackle and the soft tick of Holmes' pocket watch. I poured another cocoa. The 8th heartbeat? Holmes smiled faintly. Never came. 7 was enough. He opened the tin, tipped the fragments into the flames. They sparked once, gold, then black, then were gone. The snow continued to fall, gentle now, covering London's scars. In the hearth, the fire burned warm and steady, and the cup of truth steamed between us, chasing the last shadows from the room.